Well, good afternoon, everybody. On reflection, I don't think this is the very best title. In fact, it's somewhat misleading. As we've made very, very clear in the last couple of days, there is not an informal city, but in fact multiple informal cities. And of course, therefore, the realities which are inside, to use the word from here, are equally varied and contrasting. And this, of course, underlines the absolute vital importance of understanding context, and perhaps even more so the value of theory to help us structure our thinking and help us refine concepts and categories. But understandably, time is very short, so I'm not going to do justice either to the context or the theory. Instead, I'm going to attempt in a modest way and in a short time introduce or reintroduce something which is continually being talked about, but we've not yet, to my knowledge, actually met any of these people. We're talking about people as collectives, as groups, as communities, but rarely as individuals. And therefore I think it's vital that we get closer to this context. I'm hoping to demonstrate through this talk, although I won't talk overtly about it, about the value of long-term ethnographic approaches to really engage with people, have a lot of contact and interaction with communities and individuals. As Mona said, I'm based in the Global Urban Research Unit in Newcastle. Currently, I'm working as a VSO volunteer in Ethiopia. Well, I'm not going to talk about either of these places. Next year or next time, whenever, I will certainly talk about Addis Ababa, which is a fascinating place, and I'm also surprised but curious about the Ethiopian population here in Beirut. But that's for next time. What I do want to make very clear is the importance, I think, of the addressing really critical issues of poverty and disadvantage. Because the examples and the cases I'm going to show in somehow reflect a different sort of reality, but these are absolutely vital. So, what I want to talk about, my own background is a mixture of architecture and anthropology, and I'm understandably fascinated by this interrelationship we have with inanimate things between our material and social worlds, and particularly, of course, the dwelling and the occupants. And I'm particularly curious about these long-term processes of physical change, of consolidation, and how these are linked to processes of social change and mobility. As we know, informal houses and settlements are produced through very complex processes, largely of self-build, autoconstruction, but a whole range of actors are involved, and often these are oversimplified. But undoubtedly, one of the key motors of these processes are the people themselves and their significant agency in this. And another point I found very helpful and a way of conceptualizing this is these are processes of capital accumulation. And I'll draw briefly on Bourdieu's ideas of capital to show how dwellings improve as physical objects, they acquire increasing prestige in the form of social capital. So one of the values of looking at the currency of capital is that it challenges these negative perspectives which are very dominant in the literature on informality, which tends to be overburdened with ideas of lacking legitimacy or legality. And instead, of course, if we look at capital, we can identify some of the positive resources that individuals, households and communities have. And that, of course, includes access to formal resources. So Bourdieu's categories of capital, social, cultural, and particularly symbolic, I think are potentially helpful. So I look at how, through examples, cultural capital, particularly in the form of education, can be significant, and the role that the dwelling takes on in a symbolic way. I'll skip past Heidegger because of time. And what I do want to talk about, this actually is an early study I did in the early 70s in undergraduate, but exploring the ideas of process in the barrios populares here in Bogota. And certainly when we take a longer term view, what is very clear is that certainly in the Latin American context, these are places of aspiration and change. And people are manifesting considerable ambition, ingenuity and energy to improve not just their physical processes, but their social position. So I would argue that these processes are symbolic and transformative processes which are all about social positioning and reconfiguring personal identities. Now, such an analysis sees the house and the house project as a classic model of the world, or a cosmos, which is understood as a journey, an ongoing journey, not a static cultural model. So this reinforces the idea of the dwelling as never complete, of always changing, as Ingold reminds us. Now also, Bourdieu's other work has shown how the dwelling and the body are very intimately intertwined, physically and conceptually, through interrelationships in which our understanding of ourselves and the world is constructed through the habits of daily life and processes of habitation. Thus, the creation of the habitus is an active process in which the dwelling is central. And Carston and Hugh Jones have argued that this reinforces the idea that as people construct houses and make them in their own image, so also do these houses and house images construct themselves as individuals and groups. In other words, then, dwellings and dwellers are mutually constructed, and I think this relates to what we've just heard about the incomplete house and the tension between the houses and the camps in the Palestinian areas. So, I will, as I say, speak very little about the context, but simply to point out this very, very large movements of people and very large informal processes which take place outside the very largest cities and the megacities. So I'm, in fact, looking at data from a regional capital in northern Colombia, which is about 500,000. Now, interestingly and significantly, this is a city like many others, which is predominantly informally produced. So I'm seeing here informality much more as a process rather than a thing, a static idea. And I've been doing research since the mid-80s, so it provides an opportunity to understand how things change through time. My last visit was in 2008, and each time I've lived with a family in one of the illegal settlements on the periphery of the city. So this is looking down from the mountain to the settlement. The city is just off the slide to the right, the main part of the city. It looks very rural here, but indeed it's changing very quickly. And what I'd like to do is just to remind us, this was mentioned earlier on today, that informality may or may not have anything to do with the way things are planned or otherwise. These are the informal settlements here, and as you can see, this has a very, very clear formal layout, which again is produced entirely without reference to professionals, but very much to do with ideas, ingrained ideas of what urban form should be. I won't explore that in great detail today. But what I'd like to do is to explore the trajectories of what this means. Now, land is appropriated collectively, and we see here in the very early stages, and if we look at this dwelling here in the corner, and we can see how it changes through time. So when I arrived in January 86, this is taken from the railway bridge overlooking the settlement, and we can see this dwelling here, and already there's considerable change from just over a year ago. So when I returned in the summer, we see changes here, but no change there. And so it moves on. So we get a sense of what this might mean. Understandably here, we're getting very clear, varied ideas of varied rates of change. Now it's very hard to monitor, but the evidence of infrastructure is becoming increasingly apparent. Finally, 2008. So what I'm going to do now is this is the whole process, is explore what this means. Now, it's one thing to understand it from the bridge or from an aerial photograph or from plans, but it's another thing to be out on the ground and in the dwellings. And I want to briefly introduce you to two families, two households who I met on the very first visit. Nancy Leopoldo. And Nancy's sitting here with her friends in a living room which doesn't yet exist, but surely will. The foundations are already in place, and importantly, they planted a tree. Hernan and Albert are difficult economic circumstances, and what I've done here is contrast two households, one of which is actually prospering pretty well, and the others who are struggling. And I can't tease out the reasons for that in great detail, but we'll look at these briefly. So this is 89, and we can see already there's cables here, there's a roof. We've got the roof on but no window, whereas Hernan is still busy accumulating bricks to be able to achieve. So understandably we get these variations in fortune. The last time I was there, the Rodriguez have got a pretty substantial house now. And if we look at this trajectory through, we can see how this is a process of steady movement forward in construction. Whereas for the, I mixed it up. Sorry, that's Molina. My fault now. They are, in that sense, in a physical sense, behind. And this is partly because of the sources of income. Hernan here and all the family work together to make food to sell to the long-distance buses down on the main road. So despite their hard work and resourcefulness, they are a household on the edge of subsistence. It's very hard for them to generate surplus. And they're very vulnerable to fluctuations, illness, accident, and economic changes. Whereas in fact the Rodriguez household, they're very confident and proud of their achievement. They've even got the sign in English in here. And I encourage people to talk about their responses to the dwelling, their reasons for it, and they were very effusive, understandably so. Their achievement is tangible, visible, and concrete evidence of a worldview which is, in the words of Lysa Peaty, it sees the world as a place of opportunity where initiative, effort and hard work are rewarded. And this is particularly true if we go inside. So the dwelling is not merely providing shelter, security and effective aspects of home, but illustrates their success at improving and consolidating their relative position in the social hierarchy. And I'd like to explore this further. I asked them what they were going to do next, and this is the rest of their street, and they're planning to produce what they call the terraza at the front, and they're going to build like this. This is expensive, complex, and you can't do it without skilled help. But these are their neighbours. Their neighbours are doing this, and this is vitally important for them to keep moving in this prison. So the facade is the ideal place for competitive displays of social prestige and indications of social mobility. And we see how in the early dwellings we get direct reference to the middle class dwellings. Increasingly these are moving in a different direction. There's a greater self-confidence in the settlements about what urban form should be and how you should express the house. So here in later ones we're getting much more exuberance and, as I say, a greater self-confidence. And I would argue this is the house converted into high-value symbolic capital. Whereas in contrast, the Molinas are struggling here. And they see the world in one sense as a place of toil and work, and a place of unfairness and violence, which they've suffered a lot. And indeed here they're talking about how things have not gone well. The gourd has literally been spilt, so they're struggling. They're definitely struggling here. What I'd like to do briefly now is just to talk about the importance of cultural capital through education. There are many projects within the settlement. Here we see a small dwelling. This is Doña Juanita, who has, you can see her bed here, and she teaches children in a small school. There are also health initiatives. There's a large number of combined educational community projects which are built upon the house. And some of these are really quite ambitious. We see here the school, which again is also a house. And in many dwellings, this is Olga, And this is when I met them in '91. They were living in a wooden house. Now they've got this house. But significantly, when we go inside, we see it's full of evidence of their children's educational achievements. And these, although they look like university degrees, this is for secondary education. And the importance of display is vital. And the contrast again between the unrendered block wall, of the shiny, the importance of the future, and the way we're seeing this all displayed. And if we look in this is inside Nancy and Leopoldo's house, we see here in a sense their values are on display again. We've got the Virgin Mary, and we've got the university degree, and between them we've got the significance of the family. So we see here the unity of the family, belief in the power of the Virgin, and the transformative power of education. The prominent position of the university degree I don't think is any accident. This is their eldest son's, this is emblematic of their collective family achievement and a source of great pride. It makes visible their improving social position from unskilled manual work in the parents' generation to higher status white-collar employment in the next. Or at least that's the hope. But at least Alberto is now working as a teacher. And some extended family households, some households are even more ambitious. These are all related, they're all brothers and sisters or cousins. And you can see here I've indicated what they're studying. He's finished his bit and he's now doing a master's degree. And I think we see here evidence of and it's no coincidence again that this house, and here we see the ancestors, this is no coincidence that they're also doing very well physically. So to wrap up now, I would like to argue that very briefly I've examined the interrelationship between dwelling consolidation and processes of capital accumulation. And I think that the focus on capital assets encourages us to look beyond the visible manifestations of poverty to validate all the potential resources present in low-income communities, and to see the protagonists as active agents in processes of social and economic change. The processes of dwelling construction improvement can go beyond the resolution of shelter needs, but certainly not automatically, as we've seen, to play a construct of positive new identities and social mobility. So different types of capital come together in the consolidation process, and a well-consolidated dwelling represents highly visible and highly valued symbolic capital. I've sought evidence to explore how the role of the dwelling in this process. However, further work I think is needed to tease out the interrelationship between different types of capital, particularly the role of cultural capital, in this case education, leading to intergenerational change, and also to record other less tangible resources such as motivation and aspiration. And finally, alongside the energy and resilience of the dwellers, we may see the process of the dwellings, we may see the dwellings themselves as active in dynamic processes of social consolidation and transformation. And in the words of Wellinger, they are directly and actively implicated in creating and defining a range of social identities and relationships. And I would argue that this confirms that our material and social worlds are inextricably intertwined, with the material playing a complex but integral role in the production and reproduction of social systems, as well as in their transformation and consolidation. So, shukran, merci, thank you very much.